A millionaire burst out laughing when his cleaning lady said she spoke 10 languages. Then she revealed a secret she heard the millionaire's wife say in Russian the day before, and he went cold. Paisley woke up before the alarm went off, as she had done every day for the past 5 years, since she began saving every penny for Ailani's dream. The morning was still dark when she got up from the narrow bed in the small apartment, her movements careful not to wake her daughter, sleeping in the room next door. She walked to the kitchen, her bare feet on the cold floor, and began preparing breakfast with the same automatic gestures as always. She took Ailani's favorite cup, the one with hand-painted musical notes they had bought at a craft fair, and was about to fill it with milk when her hand trembled violently, causing the porcelain to shatter on the floor. "What was that noise, Mum?" "Are you okay?" asked Ailani. Paisley quickly bent down to pick up the shards, hiding the tremor that still ran through her fingers. The dizziness that had accompanied her for weeks returned forcefully, making the world spin for a few seconds. But she took a deep breath and forced a smile when Ailani appeared at the kitchen door, still in pajamas and with disheveled hair. "I'm fine, honey. Just let the cup slip. You know how clumsy I am early in the morning," Paisley replied. Ailani approached to help, but Paisley stopped her with a gentle gesture, not wanting her daughter to cut herself on the shards scattered across the floor. As she swept up the broken pieces, she watched Ailani take another cup and serve her own milk, the girl's graceful movements resembling a ballerina. It was impressive how her daughter had grown, now 12 years old, about to fulfill her dream of studying music in Vienna. All the sacrifice of the last 5 years was worth it, just to see that sparkle in her eyes. "Mum, today the teacher will do the final rehearsal for the audition. I'm so nervous I could barely sleep," confessed Ailani. Paisley finished cleaning the floor and stood up, discreetly supporting herself on the table, when another wave of dizziness hit her. She approached her daughter and caressed her face tenderly, feeling the warmth of young skin against her cold fingers. Ailani had the same brown eyes as her father, who had left when she was just a baby, leaving Paisley alone to raise the girl. Since then, each day was a battle, each month a victory when she managed to save some money for her daughter's future. "You're going to be wonderful, my love. You have more than enough talent and dedication that many adults don't have," said Paisley. The girl smiled and hugged her mother, and Paisley had to control herself not to show the pain she felt from the squeeze. Lately, even her daughter's hugs seemed to hurt her, as if her body was becoming increasingly fragile. She pushed that thought away and guided Ailani to the chair, serving her the simple but lovingly prepared breakfast. It wasn't much, but it was nutritious, and Paisley always made sure her daughter ate well, even if it meant she herself would have only a cup of black coffee. "Eat everything. You need energy for the rehearsal. Remember to maintain your posture and take a deep breath before you start," Paisley advised. While Ailani ate, Paisley went to the small bathroom to get ready. She looked at herself in the cracked mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. The deep dark circles, the pale skin, the hair that once shined now dull and lifeless. She had known something was wrong for months but ignored the signs. There was no time to be sick, no money for doctors. Every penny saved was sacred, untouchable, destined only for Ailani's future. She splashed cold water on her face, hoping the sensation would help clear the fog that seemed to envelop her mind. "Mum, you're taking too long." "I need you to comb my hair," called Ailani. Paisley returned to her daughter's room, picking up the hairbrush she had used since Ailani was little. She sat the girl on the bed and began to comb the long brown strands with gentle, precise movements. It was a daily ritual that both loved, a moment of silent connection between mother and daughter. But today, as she passed the brush through Ailani's silky hair, Paisley's vision blurred, the colors of the room mixing like wet watercolor. She blinked several times, forcing her eyes to focus, and continued combing as if nothing was happening. "Do you think I'll get the spot in Vienna, Mom? It's the best conservatory in the world," asked Ailani. Paisley made an elaborate braid in her daughter's hair, her fingers working from memory while her vision came and went. She knew every strand of that hair, had combed Ailani every day since she was a baby. So even with the increasing dizziness, her hands remained steady, creating the perfect braid that Ailani loved. When she finished, she secured it with a simple elastic and turned her daughter to face her. "You won't just get the spot. You'll be the best student they've ever had." "I'm absolutely certain of that," affirmed Paisley. Ailani got up and went to get her school uniform, while Paisley organized the materials in the girl's worn-out backpack. Each notebook was covered with reused gift wrapping paper, each pencil carefully sharpened to last as long as possible. Poverty was a constant presence in their lives, but Paisley made sure that Ailani never felt inferior because of it. Dignity didn't cost money, she always said. While putting the music notebook in the backpack, Paisley felt her hands trembling again, and this time the tremor went up her arms. "Mom, are you sure you're okay?" "You've been so pale lately," observed Ailani. Paisley forced another smile and hugged her daughter tightly, perhaps too tightly, as if she wanted to memorize every detail of that moment. The smell of cheap shampoo in Ailani's hair, the texture of the school uniform against her arms, the warmth of the small body full of life. She knew deep in her soul that something was terribly wrong with her body, but she couldn't. Not now. Not when they were so close to achieving the dream. "I'm so proud of you, my love. The audition for Vienna will be your moment, your chance to show the world the incredible talent you have," said Paisley. Ailani returned the hug, and Paisley had to bite her lip to avoid groaning in pain. It felt as if every bone in her body was being crushed, but she maintained the smile, kept her arms around her daughter, maintained the mask of normalcy she had been wearing for months. When they finally separated, Ailani picked up her backpack and walked to the door, stopping only to grab the music notebook from the small table at the entrance. Paisley watched her leave, memorizing each movement, each gesture, as if she knew this could be the last time. "Go out there and show everyone what you're capable of. I love you more than anything in this world," declared Paisley. As soon as the door closed behind Ailani, Paisley allowed herself to collapse on the old living room sofa. The headache that had been tormenting her for days exploded with full force, making her press her temples with trembling hands. She knew she needed to get up, get ready for work at the Carter's mansion, but her body seemed not to respond to commands. Each movement was a Herculean effort, each breath a battle. She closed her eyes for a moment. Just a moment, she promised herself. But the darkness behind her eyelids seemed to call her, pull her to a place without pain. "I can't give up now. Ailani needs me," murmured Paisley. With superhuman determination, Paisley got up from the sofa and staggered to the bathroom again. She put on the cleaning uniform she had been wearing for 3 years, the same grey uniform that made her invisible to the rich people she worked for. She tied her hair in a tight bun, splashed some water on her face again, and looked at her reflection one last time. The woman in the mirror seemed like a stranger, someone who was dying slowly, but Paisley couldn't afford to think about that. There was work to be done, money to be earned, a dream to protect. "One more day, I just need to hold on for one more day," thought Paisley. She picked up the worn bag where she kept her documents and work card, checked if she had enough money for the bus, and left the apartment. The building's hallway was dark as always. The light bulb burned out for months and never replaced. Paisley knew every step of that staircase, every crack in the wall, every damp spot on the ceiling. She had gone down those steps thousands of times in the last 5 years, always running, always in a hurry, always afraid of being late and losing her job. But today, each step seemed like a mountain, each stride a torture. "Just a few more steps. Come on, Paisley, you can do it," she encouraged herself. She was on the 3rd floor when she felt her legs completely fail. It was as if someone had cut the wires controlling her muscles, and suddenly she was falling, her body plummeting down the concrete steps with nothing she could do to prevent it. She fell down the stairs and everything went dark in an instant, silent, empty. Paisley didn't see Ailani running back, didn't hear her daughter's desperate scream upon finding her fallen on the 2nd floor landing. "Mom! Mom! Wake up! Help, somebody help me!" screamed Ailani. The neighbors came out of their apartments upon hearing Ailani's screams. The lady from apartment 203, a widow who always greeted Paisley in the hallway, was the first to arrive. She saw the terrible scene, Paisley unconscious, a small wound on her head, and Ailani kneeling beside her mother, tears streaming down her young face. Other residents joined. Someone called an ambulance. Someone brought a damp cloth for the wound. But Ailani wouldn't let go of her mother's hand, squeezing it as if she could bring her back just by the strength of her love. She was fine just now, she was fine. Why is this happening? Sobbed Eilani. The ambulance arrived in 15 minutes that seemed like hours. The paramedics worked efficiently, checking Paisley's vital signs, immobilizing her neck, carefully placing her on the stretcher. Eilani insisted on going along in the ambulance, and no one had the heart to deny her. During the journey to the hospital, the girl held her mother's hand and hummed softly the song she was rehearsing for the audition, as if the melody could cross through unconsciousness and reach Paisley wherever her mind was. "You're going to be okay, Mum. You promised you'd be there for my audition, you promised," whispered Eilani. At the community hospital, the emergency room was crowded as always. People on stretchers in the hallways, children crying, the smell of disinfectant mixed with human despair. Paisley was taken straight for tests, leaving Eilani alone in the waiting room. The girl was still wearing her school uniform, still carrying the backpack with the music notebook she had forgotten and gone back to get. If she hadn't forgotten the notebook, she wouldn't have found her mother. The thought tormented her while she waited, the hours dragging in endless agony. "Please, God, save my mother. She's all I have," prayed Eilani. It was 3 hours until a doctor finally appeared looking for Eilani. He was young, looked tired, and his eyes carried that mixture of compassion and professional detachment that community hospital doctors develop to survive. He sat down beside Eilani, his white coat wrinkled, and looked at the girl kindly before speaking. Eilani clutched her backpack to her chest, her eyes swollen from crying, desperately waiting for news. "Are you Eilani, Ms. Paisley's daughter? Your mother has woken up and is stable, but I need to talk to her about some important tests first," said the doctor. Eilani stood up immediately, anxious to see her mother, almost dropping her backpack in the process. The doctor gently guided her by the arm to a smaller, more private waiting room, away from the chaos of the main emergency area. The girl didn't want to wait any longer. Every second away from her mother was torture, but she understood that she needed to let the doctor do his job. She sat on a hard plastic chair, watching the doctor walk away down the corridor toward the observation rooms. "Can I see my mother as soon as you're finished? She needs to know I'm here," asked Eilani. The doctor nodded before disappearing through a door, leaving Eilani alone with her torturous thoughts. The girl gripped the strap of her backpack so tightly that her knuckles turned white, the music notebook inside weighing like lead. If she hadn't forgotten it, if she hadn't gone back, perhaps her mother would have died alone on those stairs. The thought made her tremble violently, and she hugged the backpack against her chest as if it were a shield against the terrible reality. "Mom, please be okay. I need you so much, don't leave me alone," whispered Eilani. Meanwhile, in the observation room, Paisley was slowly awakening from the fog of unconsciousness. The headache was worse than ever, as if 1,000 needles were piercing her skull, but she forced her eyes to open. The fluorescent light of the hospital hurt her eyes, but she needed to be awake, needed to see Eilani, make sure her daughter was okay. The room spun slightly, and she grabbed the side rails of the bed to orient herself. "Eilani, where is my daughter? Is she okay?" asked Paisley. The nurse who was checking her vital signs smiled gently and adjusted the IV in Paisley's arm. She was an older woman, with that maternal air that some nurses develop after years of caring for patients. She checked Paisley's pupils with a small flashlight, wrote something on the clipboard, and adjusted the pillow so Paisley would be more comfortable. The door opened and the doctor entered, carrying a voluminous folder with tests. "Your daughter is fine, Ms. Paisley. She's waiting outside. I'm Dr. Carvalho and I need to talk to you about your tests," said the doctor. Paisley watched the doctor carefully close the door and pull up a chair to sit beside the bed. He opened the folder and took out several tomography images, holding them against the light so Paisley could see. She didn't need to be a doctor to realize that something was very wrong. There was a dark spot evident in the images, something that shouldn't be there. The doctor took a deep breath before starting to speak, and Paisley prepared herself to hear what she had already suspected for months. "Ms. Paisley, the tests revealed a brain tumor. It's a considerable mass, located in a delicate area but still operable if we act immediately," explained Dr. Carvalho. Paisley felt the world crumble, but kept her face impassive. She had suspected. All the signs were there, the constant headaches, the dizziness, the blurred vision, the tremors. But suspecting was different from being certain, and now the certainty was there in black and white, in the images the doctor was holding. She immediately thought of the envelope hidden at the bottom of the wardrobe. 5 years of sacrifices, every penny saved with blood and sweat. "Doctor, what is the cost of this surgery, and how much time do I have to decide?" asked Paisley. The doctor mentioned the amount, and Paisley felt a chill run down her spine. It was exactly what she had saved for Ailani's exchange program, as if the universe had conspired to create the cruelest possible choice. Dr. Carvalho continued explaining the urgency of the situation, gesturing with his hands as he spoke, clearly concerned about the severity of the case. Paisley heard every word, but her mind was already making the decision her heart had made the moment Ailani was born. "Time is crucial, Mrs. Paisley. Each day that passes, the tumor grows, and the chances of success diminish. We need to operate in the next few days. Here is the cost of the operation," said Dr. Carvalho, handing her a document with the surgery's value. Paisley looked at the amount. It was exactly the same as she had kept in her purse, exactly the amount she had saved working 12 hours a day for her daughter's study trip. The girl had extraordinary talent, a brilliant future, a chance to escape the poverty that had imprisoned Paisley all her life. How could she steal that future? How could she condemn Ailani to the same life of limitations and unfulfilled dreams? A mother's love wasn't measured in years lived, but in futures secured. "Doctor, my daughter cannot know the details. She's only 12, with an important audition coming up. She has studied and dedicated herself so much to this." "I don't want her to carry this burden," Paisley requested. Dr. Carvalho frowned, clearly uncomfortable with the request. He adjusted his glasses and leaned forward, his voice lowering to a more intimate and concerned tone. Paisley could see that he was a good man, that he really cared about his patients, but she also knew that he couldn't understand the choice she was about to make. No doctor could. They were trained to save lives, not to understand the sacrifices that love demanded. "Mrs. Paisley, I understand your concern, but your daughter has the right to know. And you need support during this difficult time," argued Dr. Carvalho. Paisley shook her head negatively, her decision already made and unwavering. She knew Ailani better than anyone, knew that the girl would give up everything to try to save her mother. Ailani would throw away her future without hesitation, and Paisley couldn't allow that. Every sacrifice of the past 5 years would have been in vain if Ailani didn't go to Vienna. Paisley had worked too hard, suffered too much, dreamed too much to let everything be lost now. "Doctor, please. It's my right as a patient to decide what to share. I promise I'll think about the surgery, but I need to sort some things out first," said Paisley. The doctor sighed deeply, recognizing that he couldn't force Paisley to accept the treatment. He took his prescription pad and began writing some medications to control the symptoms, drugs for pain, for nausea, for the seizures that would certainly come. Paisley took the prescriptions knowing she wouldn't buy any of them. Every penny was sacred, untouchable, destined only for Ailani. Dr. Carvalho stood up, clearly frustrated, but respecting the patient's autonomy. "Mrs. Paisley, I'll be very clear with you. Without the surgery, you have at most 7 days. The symptoms will worsen rapidly," warned Dr. Carvalho. Paisley absorbed the information like a physical blow, but showed no reaction. 7 days. It was less time than she expected, but perhaps it would be enough to ensure that Ailani took the money and left for Vienna. She would need to be strong, hide the symptoms, pretend everything was fine, until it was too late for Ailani to do anything. It was a terrible plan, cruel even, but it was the only one that guaranteed her daughter's future. "I understand perfectly, Doctor. Can I see my daughter now?" "She must be worried," Paisley asked. Dr. Carvalho nodded affirmatively and walked to the door, stopping before opening it. He turned to Paisley one last time, his eyes full of a compassion that she couldn't afford to accept. He was young, probably had small children at home, still believed that every life could be saved. Paisley envied that innocence, that unwavering faith in medicine and logic. "Mrs. Paisley, the seizures will begin soon. Then will come the loss of vision, then paralysis. Your daughter will watch you die slowly. Please reconsider," begged Dr. Carvalho. Paisley remained silent, and the doctor finally left to get Ailani. Paisley used these few minutes to compose herself, wiping away any trace of tears, fixing her hair, forcing a smile on her face. When the door opened again and Ailani came running in, Paisley opened her arms to receive her daughter. Ailani threw herself into her mother's arms, crying and laughing at the same time. The relief of seeing Paisley awake mixed with fear of what was to come. "Mum, I thought I had lost you. When I saw you fallen on those stairs, I thought you had died," sobbed Ailani. Paisley stroked her daughter's hair, murmuring words of comfort, promising that everything would be fine. It was the first of many lies she would have to tell in the coming days, but it was a necessary lie, a lie of love. Ailani cuddled in her mother's lap as when she was little, and Paisley took the opportunity to memorize every detail: the weight of her daughter's body, the smell of her cheap shampoo, the sound of her breathing. Memories she would have to keep for the approaching eternity. "I'm here, my love, I'm not going anywhere. It was just a scare, but it's over now," Paisley lied. Ailani pulled back a little to look at her mother's face, searching for signs that she was really okay. Paisley maintained her smile, even when a stab of pain shot through her head like lightning. The girl was too smart for her age, had learned to read her mother's expressions over years of shared hardships. Paisley knew she would have to be a perfect actress in the coming days, couldn't leave any opening for Ailani to discover the truth. "Did the doctor say what you have, Mum? Why did you faint?" asked Ailani. Paisley caressed her daughter's face and invented a plausible explanation about anemia, excessive fatigue, lack of proper nutrition. These were real problems they constantly faced, so it wasn't difficult for Ailani to believe. Paisley promised she would eat better, rest more, take better care of herself. Each promise was a lie, but Ailani seemed to accept the explanations, perhaps because the alternative was too terrible to consider. "Promise you'll take care of yourself, Mom. Promise you won't leave me," asked Ailani. Paisley pulled her daughter into another hug, hiding her face in Ailani's shoulder so she wouldn't see the tears that finally escaped. How could she promise something she knew was a lie? How could she swear she would be there when she knew she had only days? But Ailani needed that promise, needed that security to move forward, and Paisley would give her that, even if it was the last thing she did. "I promise I will always be with you, my love. Even when you can't see me, I'll be there," said Paisley. A nurse entered the room with the discharge papers, interrupting the moment between mother and daughter. Paisley signed everything quickly, anxious to leave that place before Ailani asked more questions, or the doctor returned with more insistence. She got dressed with Ailani's help, pretending to be stronger than she really was. Each movement was an effort, but she transformed the pain into determination. "Let's go home, daughter. I need to show you something important," said Paisley. In the hospital corridor, Paisley stopped in front of a bench and asked Ailani to sit beside her. The corridor was relatively empty, just a few patients passing with their companions. Paisley took the bag off her shoulder and opened the inner zipper where she always kept important documents. There was the envelope, thick and heavy, containing every penny she had saved over the past 5 years. She held it for a moment, feeling the weight of all the sacrifices it represented. "Ailani, I need to give you something. It's very important," announced Paisley. Ailani looked curious as Paisley placed the envelope in her hands. The girl opened it carefully, and her eyes widened at the amount of money inside. It was more money than Ailani had seen in her entire life, a fortune by their humble standards. The girl looked from her mother to the money and back to her mother, understanding beginning to dawn in her young but perceptive eyes. "Mom, what is this? Where did so much money come from?" asked Ailani. Paisley held her daughter's face between her hands, looking deeply into her eyes. This was the most important moment of their lives, the moment when Ailani's future would be decided. Paisley needed to be convincing, needed to make Ailani understand that the money was sacred, untouchable, destined only for her dream. All the pain, all the sacrifice, everything culminated in this instant. "This is the money for your exchange program in Vienna. Every penny I've saved in the last 5 years is here. It's your future, my love," explained Paisley, without letting her daughter know the sacrifice she was making. Paisley woke up the next morning with her body weighing like lead, every movement requiring a monumental effort. Ailani had already left for school, leaving a loving note on the kitchen table along with a piece of toast she had prepared for her mother. Paisley looked at the clock and realized she was late for work at the Carter mansion. She forced herself to get up, ignoring the dizziness that threatened to knock her down again, and put on the grey uniform that made her invisible to the eyes of the rich. "Just a few more days, Paisley." "You can hold on just a few more days," she muttered to herself. The bus journey to the upscale neighborhood where the Carter mansion was located was torture. Each jolt of the vehicle sent waves of pain through her head, and she had to close her eyes several times to combat the nausea rising in her throat. The other passengers looked at her with concern. An elderly lady even offered her seat, but Paisley politely declined. She couldn't afford to appear weak, not now, not when she needed to keep her job until the last possible moment. "Thank you, ma'am, but I'm fine. It's just the heat," Paisley lied. Upon arriving at the mansion, Paisley entered through the service door as she always did. The kitchen was in an uproar, with the entire staff running back and forth preparing the special dinner that Thomas Carter would offer to important foreign investors. The head housekeeper looked at her disapprovingly when she saw her arriving late but said nothing, just pointed to the dishes that needed polishing. Paisley took the cloth and polish, her hands trembling slightly as she began the meticulous work. "Paisley, you look terrible. Are you sure you can work today?" asked one of the cooks. Paisley forced a smile and continued polishing the silverware, each movement calculated to save energy. She knew every corner of that mansion, every routine, every expectation. She had worked there for 3 years, always invisible, always efficient, never causing problems. But today her body was betraying her, and she had to lean on the counter when a particularly strong wave of dizziness hit her. She breathed deeply, counted to 10, and went back to work. "I'm fine, just slept poorly last night." "You know how it is, mother's worries," Paisley replied. The hours passed in a haze of preparations. Paisley helped arrange the immense dining table with the French porcelain that was worth more than she would earn in years of work. Each piece was positioned with millimetric precision, each glass perfectly aligned. Valerie Carter supervised everything with her critical eye, her red dress flowing as she circulated around the room, giving orders in her heavy Russian accent. Paisley observed her discreetly, noticing how the woman seemed especially anxious that night. "Paisley, these utensils are crooked. Do it right or find another job," Valerie shouted. Paisley hurried to adjust the cutlery, but her hands were shaking so much that she almost dropped a silver knife. She caught it at the last second, her heart racing with the fright. Valerie looked at her with contempt, before turning and leaving the room, her high heels clicking on the marble floor. Paisley breathed in relief and finished setting the table, each movement a battle against her own body that begged for rest. "Calm down, Paisley. Just a few more hours and you can go home," she thought to herself. The guests began to arrive at nightfall, each one more pompous than the other. Businessmen, bankers, international investors, all dressed in clothes that cost more than Paisley earned in a year. She put on the white apron over her uniform and took the silver tray to serve the appetizers. Her feet already ached, her back protested, but she maintained an upright posture and a neutral face. Years of practice had taught her to be a ghost, present but invisible. "Excuse me, sir, would you like a canapé?" Paisley offered politely. Thomas Carter was in the center of the room, his Italian suit impeccable, his gray hair perfectly combed. He gestured while talking about investments and business opportunities, his confident voice echoing through the hall. Paisley knew him well enough to know that behind that facade of success was an insecure man, always trying to impress, always seeking validation. Valerie was by his side, smiling and agreeing with everything, the perfect trophy wife. "Darling, tell them about the new project in Dubai," suggested Valerie. Skylar Carter was coming down the stairs at that moment, her 15 years evident in the awkward way she tried to balance on the high heels her stepmother had insisted she wear. She was the opposite of Valerie in every way. Where her stepmother was calculated, Skylar was spontaneous. Where Valerie was cold, Skylar had human warmth. The teenager greeted the guests politely, but Paisley could see in her eyes the discomfort with all that ostentation. "Good evening, everyone. I hope you enjoyed dinner," Skylar said formally. Paisley continued circulating with the tray, offering drinks and appetizers, always careful not to draw attention. But with each step, she felt as if the floor tilted beneath her feet. The light from the crystal chandeliers seemed too bright, the sounds of conversation too loud. She blinked several times, trying to clear her vision that insisted on becoming blurry. One of the guests bumped into her accidentally, and she almost lost her balance but managed to recover in time. "Watch it, girl. Pay attention to where you're going," the man complained. Dinner was announced and everyone headed to the table. Paisley returned to the kitchen to fetch the platters with the first course. The smell of food, which would normally be appetizing, made her stomach turn. She breathed deeply through her mouth, trying to control the nausea, and picked up the heavy silver platter with the delicate French sauce the chef had prepared. Her hands were visibly shaking now, and she had to use all her concentration not to spill anything. "Paisley, you're as white as paper. Want me to take that?" another staff member offered. Paisley refused the help and walked toward the dining room, each step measured and careful. She entered the room and began serving the plates, leaning between guests to place the food. She was serving one of the investors when she felt dizziness come like a giant wave. The world spun, her legs wobbled, and before she could control herself, she stumbled. The platter escaped from her hands, and the thick, dark sauce spread across the Persian rug that decorated the floor under the table. "Oh my God! No, no, no!" exclaimed Paisley. Valerie rose gracefully, taking the opportunity to humiliate Paisley in front of everyone. She walked around the table, her high heels clicking threateningly on the floor, and stopped beside Paisley, who was still trying to clean up the mess. With a theatrical gesture, Valerie turned to the guests, her Russian accent more pronounced when she was irritated. She dramatically gestured to Paisley on the floor, as if presenting a spectacle. "You incompetent! Do you have any idea what you just did? This rug is worth more than you would earn in 10 lifetimes. Darling, this maid is destroying our home. Look, everyone, she can't even do the simplest job," exclaimed Valerie. The guests began to laugh, first softly, then louder, as if Paisley's humiliation was unexpected entertainment. One of the bankers made a joke about the quality of employees these days. Another commented that this was why he preferred robots to people. Paisley felt tears burning her eyes, but didn't allow herself to cry. She continued trying to clean, even knowing it was useless. The sauce had already penetrated the ancient fibers of the rug. "I'm sorry, Mr. Carter. It was an accident. I'll pay for the cleaning," Paisley muttered. Skylar, who had watched everything in silence until that moment, could no longer contain herself. She stood up abruptly, her chair scraping the floor, and faced her father and stepmother with indignation. The teenager walked to Paisley and knelt beside her, helping her to stand up. The guests watched in surprise as the host's daughter defended a simple maid. "Stop! Paisley is obviously sick. Look how pale she is. She needs help, not humiliation," defended Skylar. Valerie was livid with her stepdaughter's intervention, her perfectly made-up face contorted into an expression of barely contained fury. She grabbed Skylar's arm forcefully, her red nails digging into the teenager's skin. The guests watched the family drama unfold, as if it were a play. Some embarrassed, others clearly entertained. Valerie pulled Skylar away from Paisley, positioning herself between the two. "How dare you contradict me in front of the guests?" "Go to your room immediately," ordered Valerie. Skylar looked at Paisley with compassion before turning to climb the stairs. She stopped on the first step and looked back once more, her young eyes full of silent apologies. Paisley tried to smile at the girl, wanting to show that she would be fine, but another tremor ran through her body and she had to lean against the wall. Skylar climbed the stairs slowly, each step a reluctance to leave Paisley alone with those vultures. "I'm sorry, Paisley. You don't deserve this," Skylar whispered, before disappearing. Thomas ordered Paisley to leave the dining room immediately and go to the kitchen. She obeyed, walking with as much dignity as she could muster, even with her trembling legs and blurred vision. She could hear the laughter and malicious comments behind her back, each word a stab to her already wounded pride. In the kitchen, the other staff looked at her with pity, but no one said anything. Everyone knew that questioning the employers meant immediate dismissal. "Paisley, sit down for a bit. You're about to faint," advised the cook. Paisley sat on a stool in the corner of the kitchen, her head in her hands, trying to make the world stop spinning. She thought of Eleni, of the exchange program money, of how many more days she would need to endure. The pain in her head was almost unbearable now, pulsing in rhythm with her racing heart. She needed to be strong, needed to continue, but her body was reaching its limit. "I can't give up now. Eleni needs me to be strong for a few more days," thought Paisley. After a few minutes, Paisley forced herself to get up and return to work. She grabbed a bucket and cleaning supplies and went back to the dining room to try to save the carpet. The guests had moved to the living room for coffee and liqueurs, leaving the messy table behind. Paisley kneeled again and began scrubbing the carpet, each movement sending waves of pain through her body. "I need to at least try to clean this, or they'll deduct it from my salary," she muttered to herself. Valerie appeared in the doorway, watching Paisley work with a cruel smile on her lips. She walked up to the maid and stood over her, her shadow covering Paisley as she scrubbed. Valerie then began speaking in Portuguese, making derogatory comments about Paisley's incompetence, about how some people were born to serve and others to be served. Paisley continued cleaning, pretending not to hear, pretending the words didn't affect her. "You should be thankful you still have a job after this embarrassment. Another employer would have thrown you out," said Valerie. Paisley finished doing what she could for the carpet and stood up slowly, her back protesting after so much time on her knees. She collected the cleaning supplies and was heading to the kitchen when she heard voices coming from the living room. The guests were saying goodbye, the dinner ending earlier due to the incident. Paisley could hear Thomas apologizing, promising a new dinner soon, trying to save his reputation. "It was a pleasure having you here, despite the small setback. Next time will be perfect," Thomas was saying. Paisley waited in the hallway until all the guests had left, not wanting to cause more embarrassment with her presence. She watched through the door cracks as Thomas and Valerie said goodbye to the last visitors, the perfect couple in their performance. As soon as the front door closed, she saw Thomas let out a tired sigh and loosen his tie. Valerie touched his shoulder and said something in a low voice that Paisley couldn't hear. "I'm going to have a whiskey in the office. This night was a disaster," complained Thomas. Paisley returned to the kitchen to help with the dishes. The other maids worked in silence, the atmosphere heavy after the incident. Paisley took a cloth and began drying the dishes coming out of the dishwasher, her movements automatic after years of practice. But her hands were shaking so much that she almost dropped a porcelain plate. She caught it at the last second, her heart racing with the near accident. "Paisley, go home. We'll finish up here," offered a colleague. Paisley was about to accept the offer when she noticed that Valerie had left the room and was talking on the phone in the hallway near the kitchen. Something in the woman's tone of voice, low and conspiratorial, made Paisley pay attention. She approached the kitchen door, pretending to organize the dish towels in a nearby drawer, but actually trying to listen to the conversation. Valerie was speaking in Russian, clearly believing that no one there would understand. "I need to stay a bit longer to help with the cleanup," Paisley told her colleague. Paisley continued working while Valerie spoke on the phone. The woman paced back and forth in the hallway, her heels creating a hypnotic rhythm on the marble floor. Paisley, who had learned Russian during years of self-taught study in public libraries, began to understand fragments of the conversation. Valerie mentioned documents, mentioned doctors, mentioned values. But it was when she heard Thomas's name that her blood ran cold. "What is she saying about Mr. Carter?" thought Paisley, alarmed. Paisley moved closer to the door, now truly concerned about what she was hearing. Valerie had stopped walking and was leaning against the wall right next to the kitchen door. Her voice was clearer now, more confident, as if she were confirming details of a plan. Paisley held her breath, afraid that any sound might alert Valerie to her presence. Each word in Russian that Paisley understood increased her horror. "Yes, the fake medical certificate is ready. Thomas will be committed as incapacitated shortly, as soon as everyone leaves the mansion," Valerie said in Russian. Paisley had to cover her mouth with her hand to prevent a sound of shock from escaping. Valerie continued speaking, now with a tone of satisfaction in her voice. Paisley clearly understood when she mentioned bank transfers, offshore accounts, power of attorney documents. It was an elaborate plan, clearly planned for a long time. Paisley felt her heart beating so hard that she was afraid Valerie might hear it. "I've already transferred everything to my accounts. When he's in the psychiatric clinic, no one will believe him," Valerie completed in Russian. Paisley froze with horror at the complete revelation of Valerie's plan. She slowly backed away from the door, her mind spinning with the implications of what she had discovered. Thomas Carter, as arrogant and cruel as he was about to be the victim of an elaborate scheme by his own wife. And Skylar, poor Skylar, would be left alone with that terrible woman. Paisley knew she needed to do something. But what? My God, what do I do with this information? Paisley thought desperately. Paisley backed away from the kitchen door with her heart racing, the horror of the discovery making her hands tremble even more violently. Valerie continued talking on the phone in Russian, completely unaware of Paisley's presence on the other side of the door. The maid moved away silently, but had to lean on the counter when a wave of nausea hit her with devastating force. Her vision blurred for a few seconds, and she needed to breathe deeply several times to avoid vomiting right there. The tumor in her brain seemed to pulse, sending waves of pain down her neck and shoulders. I can't faint now. I need to warn Mr. Carter before it's too late, Paisley thought, gripping the counter so tightly that her knuckles turned white. The sound of footsteps in the hallway made Paisley return to drying the dishes, although her hands were shaking so much that she almost dropped one. Valerie passed by the kitchen door, still talking on the phone, now in English with someone about the preparations for the coffee that would be served to the last guests. Paisley had to sit down for a moment on the kitchen stool, the headache throbbing with such intensity that she thought she might faint. She pressed her temples with her fingers, trying to relieve the pressure that seemed to crush her skull from the inside. The fluorescent kitchen light seemed brighter than normal, hurting her sensitive eyes. Paisley, are you okay? You're white as paper and sweating cold, asked one of her colleagues, approaching with concern. I just need a minute. The kitchen heat is affecting me, Paisley responded with difficulty, forcing a weak smile. Paisley forced herself to stand up after a few minutes, ignoring her body's violent protest. Each movement sent new waves of pain through her head, and she had to blink several times to clear the double vision that insisted on appearing. She picked up the coffee tray that needed to be taken to the guests, but had to put it back immediately when her hands trembled so violently that the pot almost fell. The other employee took the tray for her, casting a look that mixed concern and pity. Paisley nodded gratefully and decided to wait in the hallway where she could observe the movement of the house without drawing attention. Let me take the coffee. You should go home, Paisley. You're not in any condition to work, said her colleague gently. No, I need to stay a little longer. It's important, insisted Paisley, discreetly leaning against the wall. The minutes dragged on like endless hours as Paisley waited for the guests to leave. She had to sit down 3 times on the service stairs when the dizziness became absolutely unbearable, pretending to tie her shoes when other staff members passed by. The tumor in her brain seemed to grow every second, pressing against her skull, making her vision darken at the edges. She bit her lip hard, struggling not to show what she was feeling. Paisley watched the clock on the wall, each tick-tock sounding like thunder in her hypersensitive ears. Hold on, Paisley. Just a little longer. Thomas needs to know the truth, she murmured to herself like a mantra. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, Paisley heard the voices of the last guests saying goodbye in the main hall. The sound of polite laughter and promises of future meetings echoed through the mansion. She got up with extreme difficulty, using the wall as support, and walked slowly toward the living room. Each step was a battle. Her feet seemed made of lead, and she had to stop twice to regain her balance when the world spun violently around her. Good night, it was an extraordinary pleasure. We'll talk about that investment on Monday, said one of the guests. The pleasure was all ours. Drive carefully, Thomas responded cordially, his voice sounding tired. Paisley waited, hidden behind a column, while Thomas and Valerie accompanied the last visitors to the door. She observed Valerie perfectly playing the role of gracious hostess, kissing the women's cheeks, shaking the men's hands, always with the perfect smile glued to her face. When the front door finally closed with a definitive sound, Paisley saw Valerie touch Thomas's arm briefly before walking away. The woman seemed hurried, probably anxious to make more preparations for her diabolical plan the next day. I'll check if Skylar is sleeping and then take a bath. It's been a long night, Valerie said sweetly. Of course, dear. I'll have one more whiskey before coming up, Thomas replied, rubbing his temples. Paisley watched Valerie climb the stairs, waiting until she heard the distant sound of a door closing upstairs. Thomas was alone in the living room now, and Paisley knew this was her only chance. She walked to the door but had to stop and lean heavily on the doorframe when the world spun so violently that she thought she might vomit. She breathed deeply several times, swallowing the bile that rose in her throat before managing to speak. Her voice came out weaker and hoarser than intended, barely more than a whisper. "Mr. Carter, may I speak with you? It's extremely urgent," Paisley called, each word a monumental effort. "Paisley, come in, please. My God, you don't look well at all." "Sit down immediately," Thomas responded, genuinely alarmed seeing her condition. Paisley entered the room with uncertain steps and closed the door behind her, the simple act of turning the doorknob requiring total concentration. Thomas observed her with growing concern as she approached, staggering, clearly noticing how she had worsened drastically since the beginning of the evening. Paisley had to hold onto the back of a chair to avoid falling, her knees trembling with the effort of keeping her standing. Thomas immediately put down his whiskey glass and rushed to help her, holding her by the arm and guiding her to the sofa. "Paisley, you're burning with fever. Let me call an ambulance right now," said Thomas, reaching for his phone. "No, please, sir, don't call anyone. I need to tell you something first. It's a matter of life and death," Paisley begged. Paisley entered the room and closed the door behind her, which made Thomas raise his eyebrows in surprise. She had never done this before. She always kept doors open, always maintained appropriate professional distance. Paisley approached the desk, her hands clasped in front of her body to hide the trembling. "Sir, what I'm going to tell you will seem absurd, but I ask that you listen to me until the end. Your life may depend on it," Paisley began. "Paisley, you're scaring me. What happened?" asked Thomas, now alarmed. Paisley took a deep breath, knowing she needed to explain everything clearly and quickly. She started from the beginning, telling how she had learned languages over the years, studying alone in public libraries. "Mr. Carter, when my daughter was 7 years old, she began dreaming of studying music in Vienna. I started learning German so I could accompany her one day," Paisley explained. "Go on," said Thomas, intrigued but still confused. Paisley continued, explaining how she discovered she had a facility for languages and how it became her secret passion. She told how she spent the early hours studying, how she borrowed books, how she practiced alone on her way to work. "I learned French, Italian, Mandarin, Japanese, Arabic, Hindi, Hebrew, and Russian. I never had the opportunity to study when I was young, so languages became my late education," Paisley continued. "You're saying you speak 10 languages?" "Paisley, that's—" Thomas began, skeptical, letting out a laugh. Paisley didn't wait for him to finish. She began speaking in German, complete and complex phrases about music and art. Then she switched to French, quoting classical literature. Thomas, who had studied in Europe, immediately recognized the fluency and perfect pronunciation. His skepticism began to transform into amazement when Paisley continued with Mandarin, then Japanese. "My God, this is impossible. You're a cleaner." "How can you learn languages?" exclaimed Thomas, mixing German and French in his surprise, laughing, not believing Paisley. "I've been studying for years, sir, but that's not what's important now," Paisley replied. Paisley then switched to Russian, and that's when she saw the real shock in Thomas's eyes. She knew he would understand the gravity of what she was about to reveal. With a clear and firm voice, Paisley repeated word for word the conversation she had overheard Valerie having on the phone. "Tonight, after the guests went to the living room, I heard your wife on the phone speaking in Russian," said Paisley. "What did she say? Tell me exactly," demanded Thomas, now pale. Paisley then got to the crucial point, the Russian. She knew this was the most important moment, when Thomas would understand the gravity of the situation. With a clear voice, despite the excruciating pain in her head, she began to report the conversation she had overheard. Each of Valerie's words was etched in her memory with crystal precision, burned into her brain by the absolute horror of what they represented. She methodically translated each phrase, each terrible detail of the sinister plan, watching Thomas's face change from curiosity to shock, then to absolute horror. "Your wife said exactly this, that the fake medical certificate was ready, that you would be committed as mentally incapable," translated Paisley. "It can't be true. Valerie loves me." "We've been married for 5 years, protested Thomas, but his voice already carried doubt. Paisley continued relentlessly, knowing that every second counted. She explained about the bank transfers Valerie had mentioned, about how she had already moved all the money to overseas accounts. She mentioned the names of corrupt doctors Valerie had bribed, the details about the psychiatric clinic, where Thomas would be kept indefinitely. Each revelation was like a punch to Thomas's stomach, and Paisley could see his world crumbling piece by piece. She also said that when you were committed, no one would believe anything you said, Paisley completed. My God. Those documents she made me sign, always after dinner, muttered Thomas, the pieces falling into place. Thomas rose abruptly, almost knocking over the coffee table in his rush. He ran to his computer, his hands trembling as he typed the passwords to his bank accounts. Paisley watched him from her position, too weak to stand up, but still alert enough to see the devastation taking over his face. She had to close her eyes when the screen light intensified her headache to unbearable levels, but she opened them again upon hearing Thomas gasp in shock. It's all empty. All the accounts, millions and millions. How did I not notice? Said Thomas in a strangled voice. When was the last time you personally checked your finances? Paisley asked weakly. Thomas sank into the chair in front of the computer, his face pale as wax, his eyes glazed in shock. Paisley could see the exact moment when years of memories began to be reinterpreted under this terrible new light. The dinners where Valerie always personally served his last drink, insisting it was a special whiskey she had bought just for him. The mornings when he woke up confused and disoriented, with Valerie saying he had worked late and was exhausted. The documents she brought for him to sign, always in a hurry, always with some excuse about urgent deadlines. She was deceiving me, giving me medications, always altering my perceptions and making me sign documents without reading, said Thomas, his voice breaking. Sir, she will act soon. We need to do something now, urged Paisley. At this crucial moment, the door opened softly and Valerie entered. Paisley tried to stand up to alert Thomas, but her legs simply didn't respond to her brain's commands. She remained sunken in the sofa, looking even sicker than she actually was, which was perhaps a blessing in disguise. Valerie stopped in the middle of the room, her eyes moving quickly between Thomas at the computer, with the bank statements clearly visible on the screen, his devastated and pale face, and Paisley clearly debilitated on the sofa, shaking and sweating. For a brief moment, Paisley saw Valerie's mask slip, revealing a flash of panic before she recomposed her expression. What's happening here? Thomas, darling, you're as pale as a ghost, said Valerie, with false concern. Why has our money disappeared, Valerie? Where is my fortune? What have you done? Thomas asked directly, his voice trembling with contained anger. Valerie didn't lose her composure for more than a second. Instead, she instantly transformed into the concerned wife, approaching Thomas with careful steps, hands extended in an appeasing gesture. She tried to touch his face, but he abruptly moved away, almost knocking over the chair. Valerie took advantage of his sudden movement to completely change the narrative. Paisley watched with fascinated horror as the woman took the cell phone from her purse and began showing videos to Thomas. Darling, don't you remember? You made these transfers yourself last week. You said it was to protect our money from taxes, Valerie lied smoothly. I never did that. You're lying, Thomas shouted. The videos on Valerie's phone showed Thomas at various moments over the past few weeks, heatedly discussing business on the phone, gesturing frustratedly in his office, even the incident with the rug from the night before. But Paisley noticed that they had all been carefully edited to remove context, making Thomas appear erratic and unstable. In one of the videos, he appeared to be yelling at nothing in his office, but Paisley remembered that day. He was in a video conference that had gone wrong. Valerie had removed the audio of the other person, making it seem like he was shouting into the void. See, darling, you've been having these episodes for weeks. I'm so worried about you, said Valerie, fake tears glistening in her eyes. This is edited. You secretly recorded me and edited everything, Thomas accused. Valerie then turned to Paisley, who was visibly trembling on the sofa, sweat dripping down her pale forehead despite the room's air conditioning. The pain in her head had reached a level she didn't think possible, as if someone was hammering nails into her skull. She could barely keep her eyes open, the room's light cutting through her eyes like blades. Valerie took advantage of Paisley's terrible appearance to strengthen her narrative of madness. She pointed at the maid with a dramatic gesture, turning to Thomas with an expression of deep concern. Darling, you're having a psychotic break. Look what you've done. You've even convinced our poor sick maid of your conspiracy theories, Valerie said softly. Paisley is sick, yes, but she's telling the truth about you. Thomas desperately defended. The distant sound of sirens began to cut through the night air, first like a whisper, then steadily growing until it became impossible to ignore. Paisley tried to warn Thomas, tried to scream that he needed to run, but when she opened her mouth, only a weak, hoarse moan escaped. Her vision was darkening at the edges, tunnels of darkness advancing from all sides. She had to use all her remaining strength just to stay conscious, clutching the arms of the sofa so tightly that her nails left marks in the leather. Thomas, run, Paisley managed to whisper. Don't worry, darling. The doctors will take good care of you, said Valerie with poisonous sweetness. The sirens grew deafeningly loud as the vehicles stopped in front of the mansion. Paisley could see the flashes of red and white light reflecting in the windows, creating a macabre spectacle on the walls of the room. Thomas ran to the window and saw not 2, but 3 ambulances, all without clear hospital identification. Men dressed in white were already getting out, and even from a distance, Paisley could see they were too big, too muscular to be simple paramedics. What have you done, Valerie? Who are these people? Thomas shouted. They're the best doctors, darling. Specialists in cases like yours, Valerie responded calmly. The door to the room flew open violently, hitting the wall with such force that a painting fell. 2 enormous men dressed in white entered first, their broad shoulders barely fitting through the door. They moved with military precision, one going left, the other right, creating a perimeter. Right behind them, 2 more men entered, one carrying what looked like a medical case, the other holding papers that Paisley suspected were the falsified documents. Mr. Carter, I'm Dr. Volkov. We've come to help you, said the man with a poorly disguised Russian accent. You're not real doctors, this is a kidnapping, Thomas shouted. Thomas tried to run for the door, but the men were faster. They tried to restrain him and take him away, approaching with medical instruments. The more Thomas fought, the more he seemed to confirm the narrative Valerie had created, a man in a psychotic break, dangerous to himself and others. Paisley watched in horror as Thomas screamed about the scheme, about the theft, about the conspiracy, each word making him appear more delusional to the supposed doctors. Please, Mr. Carter, don't resist. It will only make things worse for you, one of the men said calmly. You don't understand. She stole all my money. Check the accounts, Thomas begged. Paisley gathered every ounce of strength she still possessed and tried to stand up to help. She managed to get to her feet for a brief moment, the world spinning violently around her before staggering. The men noticed her, and one of them approached as if to help her, but Paisley saw the syringe in his hand. She tried to move away, but her legs gave out completely, and she fell heavily back onto the sofa. No, don't touch me. Mr. Carter is telling the truth, Paisley managed to say, in a weak voice. Poor thing, she's delirious with fever. Must be very sick, commented one of the men. Valerie approached Paisley with fake concern, placing her hand on her forehead as if checking her temperature. Paisley tried to move away from the touch, but had no strength. Valerie turned to the men with an expression of deep sadness, an award-worthy performance. She lowered her voice as if sharing a confidence, but still loud enough for everyone to hear. This is our maid. She has been very ill, and my husband, in his current state, has convinced her of his delusions. It's terrible what mental illness can do, Valerie explained. See, he has manipulated even the sick maid. She is clearly delirious too, in need of urgent medical care, Valerie added dramatically. One of the men opened the medical case and began preparing a syringe with clear liquid. Paisley knew that if they sedated Thomas now, it would be the end. He would be taken away and locked up in some corrupt institution where Valerie would keep him drugged and incapacitated for the rest of his life. Skylar would be orphaned from a living father, trapped with a monstrous stepmother. Paisley tried to scream, to warn, to do anything, but her body simply wouldn't respond anymore. No, don't let... Skylar, mumbled Paisley. She's mentioning my stepdaughter. See how my husband has disturbed her, Valerie said to the men. Thomas continued struggling against the men holding him, but it was useless. They were professionals, probably ex-military, generously paid by Valerie to do this dirty work. One of them held Thomas's arm, while the other approached with the syringe. Thomas looked desperately at Paisley, silently begging for help, but she could barely keep her eyes open. "Paisley, tell them about the Russian, about what you heard," shouted Thomas. "Sir, Paisley tried to speak, but her voice failed completely. They were about to sedate him while Paisley desperately fought to find her voice. The nurses held him with professional strength, each following what they believed to be standard medical procedure for a patient in crisis. Paisley could see the panic in Thomas's eyes, the desperation of a man who perfectly understood that he was about to lose everything, his freedom, his sanity, his life as he knew it. With superhuman effort, Paisley managed to lift her head from the sofa where she was sinking, her blurry vision focusing on the professionals who had been completely deceived by Valerie. "Stop! Please listen. The documents are fake," Paisley managed to shout in a hoarse voice. "Ma'am, you need to calm down. We're here to help," one of the nurses responded kindly. Paisley noticed from the heavy accent of at least two of the nurses that they were from Eastern Europe. This discovery gave her a desperate idea. If she could speak to them in their native language, perhaps she could make them understand the truth. Gathering strength she didn't know she possessed, Paisley began speaking rapidly, first in Portuguese, then translating word for word what Valerie had said on the phone earlier. She explained about the Russian conversation she had overheard, about the elaborate plan, about the illegal bank transfers. "I heard her on the phone. She said the medical documents were fake," Paisley shouted desperately. "Please verify before you do anything," she begged. The nurse holding the syringe hesitated for a moment, his professional eyes noticing something genuine in Paisley's desperation. He was a real doctor, not a criminal, and had been trained to recognize signs of manipulation and lies. Something about the situation wasn't right. The clearly sick maid defending her employer, the teenage daughter initially absent, the wife insisting too much on urgency. He slightly lowered the syringe and looked at his colleagues, who also seemed to be having doubts. "Doctor, perhaps we should review the documents one more time," suggested one of the nurses. "Something here doesn't seem right," agreed another professional. Valerie became visibly furious with Paisley's interference, her perfectly made-up face contorting into an expression of poorly disguised panic. She quickly took her cell phone from her purse and began dialing frantically, muttering something about calling the clinic director, about suing the nurses for professional negligence. It was clear that she was trying to pressure the professionals to act before they could question too much. She then turned to them with renewed authority, using all her power of manipulation. "You were called to do medical work. My husband needs urgent treatment," Valerie demanded. "Every minute of delay could worsen his condition," she insisted with fake concern. It was at this crucial moment that the sound of rapid footsteps descending the stairs echoed through the house. Skylar appeared running, still wearing her pink flannel pajamas, hair disheveled from sleep but eyes completely alert and full of determination. The teenager ran straight to her father, bravely positioning herself between him and the nurses. Her arms opened protectively, as if her small body could form a barrier against those men. The medical professionals immediately backed away, clearly uncomfortable with the minor's presence. "My father is not crazy. Stop right now," Skylar shouted with a firm voice. "It's her who's doing this. My stepmother is lying to all of you," the girl bravely accused. The nurses seemed even more disturbed by Skylar's presence. As legitimate medical professionals, they knew that forcibly committing a father in front of his underage daughter was something extremely delicate and required specific protocols. One of them, the oldest, who seemed to be the team leader, took a step back and raised his hand asking for calm. He looked at Valerie with growing suspicion, then at Thomas, who was protectively embracing his daughter. "Mrs. Carter, you didn't inform us there was a minor in the house," said the head nurse. "This completely changes the protocol," he explained professionally. Skylar took advantage of the moment of hesitation to tell everything she had witnessed in recent months. With a trembling but determined voice, she reported the time she saw Valerie put something in her father's drink, the strange conversations in a foreign language, the increasingly controlling behavior of her stepmother. The teenager spoke with the raw honesty that only a child possesses, and the nurses listened attentively. It was clear they were reassessing the entire situation. "She puts medicine in his whiskey every night. I've seen it many times," Skylar revealed. She talks on the phone in a strange language about money and documents, the girl continued. Valerie tried to interrupt Skylar several times, but the nurses prevented her with professional gestures. They were real doctors, not thugs, and had an ethical obligation to hear all parties involved, especially when there was a minor present. Valerie then changed tactics, walking to a nearby drawer and pulling out a voluminous folder of documents. She spread them dramatically on the table, showing medical reports, prescriptions, psychiatric reports, all with an official appearance. "Here is all the medical evidence. My husband has been sick for months," Valerie insisted. "His own daughter is being affected by his hallucinations," she added, pointing to Skylar. Paisley watched the scene with growing desperation, knowing that every second counted. With tremendous willpower, she forced herself to rise from the sofa, her legs violently trembling with the effort. The world spun around her in nauseating circles, and she had to grip the sofa arm to avoid falling immediately. The pain in her head was so intense that she almost screamed but bit her lip to stay focused. She staggered toward the table where she had seen a phone, determined to call the real police. "Need to. Call. Real help," Paisley muttered to herself. "Paisley, be careful, you're going to fall," Thomas warned worriedly. Paisley reached the phone with trembling fingers, almost dropping the device in her haste. She began dialing the emergency number, but her hands were shaking so much that she missed the digits. Finally, after 3 attempts, she managed to complete the call. When they answered, she shouted the Carter Mansion address with all the strength she still possessed, explaining that there were falsified medical documents, that a woman was trying to commit her husband illegally. "Carter Mansion! Come quickly!" "It's an emergency," Paisley shouted into the phone. "Please send police to verify the documents," she begged desperately. Valerie crossed the room in quick strides, her heels snapping furiously on the floor. She snatched the phone from Paisley's hand. Then Paisley, already weakened by illness, could no longer balance herself, and her legs gave way completely, and she fell to the floor. "Poor thing, she's delirious with fever. Someone help her," exclaimed Valerie, feigning concern. "See how my husband has disturbed her with his fantasies," she added to the nurses. Paisley lay on the floor, her vision darkening at the edges as she struggled to remain conscious. From the floor, she could see everyone's feet moving around her in a confused ballet. The nurses seemed divided. Some wanted to help her, others wanted to continue with Thomas, all clearly confused about what was really happening. One of them knelt beside Paisley, checking her vital signs with genuine professional concern. "This woman is really very sick," said the nurse. "She needs urgent medical attention," he diagnosed. Skylar let out a cry of anguish upon seeing Paisley on the floor and tried to run to help her, but Valerie intercepted her. The woman approached her stepdaughter. To the nurses, it just looked like a stepmother trying to protect the child from a disturbing scene. Skylar took a few steps back, tears streaming down her young face. "Get away from me. Stop pretending you're helping me. That you care about any of us. Paisley needs help," shouted Skylar. "She saved my dad. You have to believe her," the teenager pleaded. Thomas also tried to reach Paisley, but the nurses, still following what they believed to be medical protocol, kept him restrained. The situation was at a tense impasse, the nurses clearly confused, Valerie trying to maintain her narrative, Thomas and Skylar desperate to help Paisley. "Please, let me help her. She's really sick," Thomas begged. "My wife is lying to all of you," he insisted. Paisley tried to speak, but her voice came out only as a hoarse whisper. The tumor in her brain was taking its toll on all her effort, and she felt her bodily functions failing one by one. First it was her legs, now her arms barely responded. She tried to crawl across the floor, but only managed to move a few inches. The frustration of not being able to help, of seeing the truth so close but unable to reach it, was almost worse than the physical pain. "I can't. Give up. Now," Paisley thought desperately. "Skylar, Thomas, need me," she muttered almost inaudibly. Valerie took advantage of the distraction caused by Paisley's condition to reinforce her narrative to the nurses. She showed more documents, talked about Thomas's invented medical history, even mentioned specific medications he was supposedly supposed to be taking. Each lie was interwoven with partial truths, making it difficult for the medical professionals to distinguish what was real. She was a master manipulator and was using every trick she knew. He stopped taking his medicine weeks ago. That's why he's like this, Valerie lied convincingly. The doctor said this could happen, she added. The head nurse, a middle-aged man with years of experience, was clearly disturbed by the whole situation. He had seen many cases of psychiatric admission, but something here didn't fit. The teenage daughter defending her father, the sick maid making serious accusations, the wife insisting too much. There were too many red flags. He decided to follow protocol to the letter and asked to see the original documents again. Mrs. Carter, I need to verify these documents more carefully, said the head nurse. And perhaps we should wait for the police to arrive since they've been called, he prudently suggested. Valerie visibly paled at the suggestion of waiting for the police. She looked at the clock, then at the window, clearly calculating her options. Paisley, even in her debilitated state, could see the exact moment when Valerie realized her plan was crumbling. The woman took a deep breath and tried one last card, taking out her cell phone again. I'm going to call our lawyer. You'll be sued for medical negligence, Valerie threatened. Every minute my husband goes without treatment is your responsibility, she shouted. But her words had the opposite effect. The nurses, being legitimate professionals, knew their rights and responsibilities. The mention of lawyers and lawsuits only made them more cautious. The head nurse nodded to his colleagues to release Thomas, explaining that they needed to completely reassess the situation. They were real doctors, not criminals, and wouldn't risk their licenses without absolute certainty. We'll wait for the police and resolve this properly, the head nurse decided. Release Mr. Carter for now, he ordered. Thomas immediately ran to Paisley, kneeling beside her on the floor. Skylar also broke free from Valerie and joined them, holding Paisley's hand with affection. Paisley could feel the warmth of their hands, the genuine concern in their touches, and it gave her a moment of peace amid the chaos. She tried to smile at them, but wasn't sure if her facial muscles had obeyed. Paisley, hang in there. Help is coming, Thomas said gently. You were so brave, Paisley. You saved my dad. Skylar thanked her with tears in her eyes. The sound of sirens began to echo in the distance, growing steadily louder. Valerie was in panic now, pacing back and forth across the room, mumbling in Russian on the phone. Paisley recognized some words. She was trying to alert someone, perhaps accomplices, that the plan had failed. The nurses had moved away, forming a group and discussing among themselves what to do. It was clear they realized they had been involved in something much more complex than a simple psychiatric admission. The police are coming, announced one of the nurses looking through the window. Everyone stay calm, requested the head nurse. Paisley felt a new wave of weakness hit her, this time accompanied by a numbness spreading throughout her body. It was as if she was sinking in quicksand, each part of her being pulled down. But she fought to keep her eyes open, to remain present. She needed to see this through to the end, needed to make sure Thomas and Skylar would be safe. I can't pass out. Now, Paisley thought with determination. Just a little. Longer, she murmured. Valerie made one last desperate attempt to salvage her plan. She approached the nurses with tears in her eyes, fake tears but convincing, and begged them to take Thomas before the police arrived. She said there was a misunderstanding, that she could explain everything, but Thomas needed urgent treatment. She even offered to pay extra, though she was subtle about it. Please, for God's sake, my husband needs help, Valerie pleaded theatrically. We can sort out the details later, she suggested desperately, but it was too late. The headlights of police cars illuminated the windows of the room, and the sound of doors opening and authoritative voices echoed from outside. The nurses seemed relieved. Now the responsibility would be the police's, not theirs. Valerie ran to the window, her face turning even paler as she saw multiple patrol cars. She had underestimated the response to Paisley's call. This is a misunderstanding. I will sue all of you, Valerie shouted in desperation. You don't know who you're dealing with, she threatened. Thomas held Paisley gently, trying to keep her comfortable while they waited. Skylar stroked Paisley's hair, softly humming a gentle melody. It was the same song Paisley had heard Ailani practice so many times, and tears ran down Paisley's eyes thinking of her daughter. She hoped Ailani would understand, would know that her mother had done the right thing. Paisley, you are a hero, said Thomas emotionally. "We will never forget what you did for us," Skylar promised. The front door opened, and uniformed police officers quickly entered, assessing the situation with trained eyes. They saw Valerie near the window, the confused medical nurses in a group, and Thomas and Skylar kneeling beside Paisley, who was clearly in critical condition on the floor. The officer in command immediately began giving orders, calling for a real ambulance for Paisley, and starting to question everyone present. "What's going on here?" asked the chief officer. "We need an ambulance immediately for this woman," he ordered. Valerie tried to approach the officers first, wanting to control the narrative, but Thomas was faster. He stood up and, with a clear and authoritative voice, explained the whole situation: the financial scam, the falsified medical documents, the attempted forced institutionalization. Skylar corroborated every word, and even the nurses confirmed their doubts about the legitimacy of the documents. "This woman stole all my money and tried to have me forcibly committed," Thomas accused, pointing at Valerie. "Check the documents, they're all fake," he demanded. Paisley heard overlapping voices, arguments, the sound of handcuffs being placed, but everything seemed very distant now, as if it were happening in another world. She felt gentle hands lifting her, placing her on something soft. A stretcher, she vaguely realized. Professional voices discussed her condition, mentioned hospital, emergency, neurosurgery. She wanted to tell them about the tumor, about the little time she had left, but the words wouldn't come. "Take care of Ailani," Paisley whispered, not knowing if anyone heard. "Please, my daughter," she tried to say. Paisley's consciousness returned slowly, as if she were emerging from deep, dark waters. The voices around her were confused, mixed, urgent. She could feel Skylar's hands still holding hers, could hear Thomas arguing with someone, could sense movement and commotion throughout the room. Her eyes opened with difficulty, the blurry vision showing only shadows and lights moving. The pain in her head had become a constant presence, pulsing with each beat of her weakened heart. "Paisley, she's waking up!" exclaimed Skylar with relief. "Thank God, I thought we had lost her," said Thomas emotionally. The police had arrived in full force. There were at least 6 officers in the room now, each fulfilling a specific function. 2 of them were with Valerie, who was still trying to maintain her pose as a concerned wife, although her nervousness was increasingly evident. 2 others were interrogating the medical nurses, who seemed relieved to have the situation in the hands of the authorities. One officer was verifying the documents Valerie had presented, while another was taking photos of the entire scene. Paisley tried to speak, but her throat was dry as sand. "Water," she managed to whisper. "Please," she asked in an almost inaudible voice. Skylar immediately grabbed a cup of water that someone brought and helped Paisley drink small sips. The cold liquid flowing down her throat was like life returning to her body, giving her enough strength to speak a few words. Paisley knew she had crucial information, evidence that could seal Valerie's fate. With tremendous effort, she raised her trembling hand and pointed to Valerie's purse that was on the coffee table. Her voice came out hoarse and weak, but audible enough for the police to hear. "Documents. Fake. In there," Paisley managed to say with difficulty. "She keeps everything. In her purse," she completed with effort. One of the officers immediately grabbed Valerie's purse, who tried to protest but was silenced with a warning gesture. Skylar, realizing the importance of the moment, ran and stood beside the officer, pointing to specific compartments she had seen Valerie use. The teenager was determined to help, her anger toward her stepmother giving her the courage to act. The officer began to methodically empty the contents of the purse onto the table, using gloves to avoid contaminating the evidence. "There's a secret compartment at the bottom," Skylar indicated. "I saw her hide things there several times," the girl revealed. The officer found the compartment Skylar had mentioned, and upon opening it discovered a veritable treasure trove of incriminating evidence. There were multiple medical documents, all with an official appearance but clearly falsified when examined closely. The signatures were inconsistent. The stamps looked like they were made with a common printer. The dates didn't match the hospital records. More importantly, there were receipts for bank transfers, all showing large sums leaving Thomas's accounts for accounts in tax havens. "My God, look at this," said the officer holding the papers. "For there are dozens of falsified documents and receipts for illegal transfers," he noted. Valerie turned as pale as wax when she saw the documents being exposed. She tried to get up from the sofa, but was prevented by the officers flanking her. Her mask of composure finally fell completely, revealing the panic underneath. She began to speak rapidly, trying to explain, trying to justify, but her words came out jumbled and contradictory. It was obvious that she hadn't planned to be discovered, especially not this way. "That's not mine! Someone put that in my purse!" Valerie screamed desperately. "It's a setup. My husband is sick and is setting all this up," she accused. The medical nurses, seeing the documents being revealed as fake, were visibly disturbed. They had been completely deceived, used as pawns in Valerie's scheme. The head nurse approached the officers, offering his full cooperation. He explained how they had been called, what documents they had received, all the inconsistencies that now made sense. His professional indignation was evident. No true medical professional liked being used for criminal purposes. "We were completely deceived, officer," said the head nurse. "These documents were presented to us as legitimate," he explained indignantly. Paisley observed everything from the floor, each breath a monumental effort. She could feel her body failing, could feel time running out. But the satisfaction of seeing Valerie being exposed gave her a strange peace. She had fulfilled her mission, had saved Thomas and Skylar. With the little strength she still had, she pointed to another place, Thomas's office. She remembered seeing Valerie store things there when she thought no one was looking. "She has a safe in the office that is password protected. There might be something," whispered Paisley. "Behind. The books," she managed to say. Two officers immediately went to check the office, followed by Skylar, who knew the room well. Thomas also accompanied them, eager to discover the extent of his wife's betrayal. Paisley could hear them moving, opening drawers, searching. Then there was an exclamation of surprise. They had found something significant. The sounds of papers being handled, and surprised voices echoed through the house. Valerie tried to stand up again, clearly wanting to stop the search, but was firmly kept in place. "You can't do this without a warrant," protested Valerie. "This is invasion of privacy," she shouted. Thomas returned from the office holding a bulky folder, his face a mask of betrayal and pain. Inside were contracts, power of attorney documents, property transfer documents, all with his signature, but he didn't remember signing any of them. The dates corresponded to the nights when Valerie served him his special whiskey, the nights he woke up confused and disoriented. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. Skylar was by his side, holding more papers showing detailed plans, including the schedule for forced institutionalization. "She planned everything for months," said Thomas in a strangled voice. "Every detail, every step, it's all documented here," he revealed. One of the police officers began reading Valerie her rights, informing her that she was being arrested for fraud, document forgery, attempted kidnapping, and a series of other charges. Valerie finally realized there was no way out, that her elaborate plan had completely fallen apart. She looked at Paisley with pure hatred, clearly blaming the maid for her downfall. Paisley met her gaze without fear. She had won. She had protected innocent people, and that was all that mattered. "Valerie Carter, you're under arrest for multiple criminal charges," the officer formally declared. "Anything you say can and will be used against you in court," he continued. Skylar knelt again beside Paisley, tears streaming down her young face. She stroked Paisley's hair gently, murmuring words of gratitude and concern. The teenager had matured years in that single night, having witnessed betrayal and courage in their purest forms. Paisley tried to smile at her, wanting to offer some comfort, but wasn't sure if her facial muscles obeyed. "Paisley, you saved my family," said Skylar, crying. "I'll never forget what you did for us," the girl promised. Paisley felt increasingly weaker, as if she were slowly dissolving. Her vision was getting darker, sounds more distant. But she fought to remain conscious. There was something important she needed to know. With supreme effort, she whispered her daughter's name, the only person who truly mattered in her life. Eilani needed to know that her mother had been brave, that she had made a difference, that she had chosen to do the right thing, even knowing the price. "Eilani, my daughter," murmured Paisley. "Need to. Tell her," she whispered weakly. Thomas, hearing Paisley mention Eilani, immediately understood. He took his phone and called the girl, explaining that there was a medical emergency and that Eleni needed to come immediately. His voice was authoritative but gentle, ensuring that the girl wouldn't panic before arriving. He gave the address and assured that a police car would pick her up. Paisley heard everything through a fog of pain and exhaustion, grateful for Thomas's consideration. "Your daughter is on her way, Paisley," said Thomas gently. "She'll be here in minutes," he assured her. The real paramedics, not the fake ones Valerie had hired, were constantly checking Paisley's vital signs. Their expressions were grave, exchanging worried looks as they worked. One of them was on the phone with the hospital, describing the symptoms, asking them to prepare the emergency room. Paisley could hear them mentioning medical terms that she didn't completely understand, but she knew from their tone that the situation was critical. She wasn't afraid of death. She had accepted her fate days ago, but she wanted to see Ailani one last time. "Pressure dropping rapidly," said one paramedic. "We need to take her now, or she won't make it," warned another. Valerie was being escorted out of the mansion, her hands cuffed behind her back, her head bowed in defeat. But when she passed by Paisley, she stopped and whispered something in Russian, something venomous and cruel. Paisley understood every word. It was a curse, a wish that Paisley would die in agony. But the words didn't affect her. Paisley had won the battle that mattered. Valerie would be imprisoned. Thomas was free. Skylar was safe. Her sacrifice had been worth it. "Take her away," ordered the police officer, pushing Valerie. "We don't want any more problems," he said firmly. Paisley felt herself being carefully lifted and placed on a stretcher. Each movement sent waves of pain through her body, but she bit her lip to avoid screaming. Skylar refused to let go of her hand, walking beside the stretcher as the paramedics carried her. Thomas was on the other side, his face full of concern and gratitude. They were almost at the door when they heard a car skid to a stop outside. Door slamming, footsteps running, and then Ailani burst through the entrance. "Mom! Mom!" Ailani screamed desperately. "I'm here, my daughter." Paisley tried to respond, but her voice was just a whisper. Ailani ran to the stretcher, her young face contorted in terror at seeing her mother's condition. She had rushed out of school, still wearing her uniform, the music notebook forgotten in her haste. Tears flowed freely down her face as she held Paisley's face between her small hands. Paisley gathered every ounce of remaining strength to focus on her daughter's eyes, to be present in this crucial moment. "Mum, what happened? Why are you like this?" sobbed Ailani. "You promised you would be fine," the girl cried. Paisley tried to explain, but the words wouldn't come. It was Skylar who gently told Ailani about her mother's courage, about how she had saved her family, about how she had been a hero. Ailani listened between sobs, her hand squeezing Paisley's with desperate force. Paisley could see the pride mixed with terror in her daughter's eyes, and it broke her heart. Ailani was too young to lose her mother, too young to be alone in the world. "Your mother saved my dad," Skylar told Ailani. "She is the bravest person I've ever known," she stated with conviction. Thomas approached Ailani, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. He promised that he would take care of her, that she would never be alone, that everything Paisley had done would not be in vain. Ailani barely seemed to hear him, all her attention focused on her mother. Paisley wanted to say so many things, about the exchange program money, about her dreams for Ailani, about the infinite love she felt. But all she could do was weakly squeeze her daughter's hand. "Mr. Carter will take care of you," Paisley whispered with immense effort. "The money, use it to live," she managed to say. The paramedics insisted they needed to leave immediately. Every second counted now. The window to save Paisley was rapidly closing. They began pushing the stretcher toward the ambulance, Ailani running alongside, refusing to let go of her mother's hand. Skylar and Thomas followed them, both determined to accompany them to the hospital. The scene was heartbreaking. A desperate daughter, a dying mother, an improvised adoptive family united by tragedy. "We won't leave you alone," Thomas promised Ailani. "We're family now," he declared firmly. Paisley was carried into the ambulance, the paramedics immediately connecting her to various machines. The beeps and alarms sounded urgent, each indicating a failing body system. Ailani climbed into the ambulance too, with Skylar and Thomas promising to follow them in another car. Paisley could feel the ambulance begin to move, the siren on rushing through the city streets. She looked at Ailani, memorizing every detail of her daughter's face. "Mom, don't leave me," Ailani begged. "You're all I have in the world," she sobbed desperately. Paisley wanted to promise she would stay, that she would fight, that she would win. But she knew the truth. The tumor had progressed too far. Her body was giving up. All she could do was be present in these final moments, give Ailani the memories she would need to move forward. With tremendous effort, Paisley raised her hand and touched Ailani's face, wiping away her tears. The gesture exhausted her last reserves of energy, and she felt the darkness approaching. "Be strong," Paisley whispered almost inaudibly. "Fulfill your dreams," were her last words before losing consciousness. The paramedic monitoring Paisley's vital signs became alarmed at what he saw on the monitors. Her blood pressure was dropping dangerously, her breathing becoming increasingly weak, her heart struggling to continue beating. He began working frantically, applying medications, adjusting the oxygen, doing everything possible to keep her alive until they reached the hospital. Ailani watched everything with eyes wide with terror, not understanding the medical terms, but perfectly comprehending the urgency. "She's going into multiple organ failure," the paramedic told his colleague. "We need to get to the hospital in the next 5 minutes or we'll lose her," he warned urgently. Ailani squeezed her mother's inert hand, praying with all her being to any divine force that might be listening. She promised to be good, to study hard, to fulfill all her mother's dreams, anything to keep her alive. Tears fell upon the intertwined hands of mother and daughter, each drop a silent prayer. The ambulance made a sharp turn, tires screeching, the driver clearly racing against time. "Please, Mom, hold on a little longer," begged Ailani. "The hospital is close. You'll be fine," she said, trying to convince herself. The ambulance skidded to a stop at the hospital's emergency entrance. The doors opened, and a medical team was already waiting, alerted by radio about the severity of the case. Paisley was quickly transferred to a hospital stretcher, and they rushed her through the corridors. Ailani tried to follow them, but was gently stopped by a nurse. The girl stood in the corridor, watching her mother disappear through the double doors of the emergency room. "Where are they taking her?" Ailani shouted desperately. "I need to stay with my mother," she begged the doctors. Thomas and Skylar arrived running shortly after, finding Ailani collapsed on the corridor floor, sobbing uncontrollably. Skylar immediately embraced the younger girl, offering what comfort she could. Thomas went to speak with the doctors, using his influence to ensure Paisley would receive the best possible treatment. He returned with grim news. Paisley needed immediate brain surgery. Her chances were minimal, but there was a small hope. "They'll do everything possible," Thomas told Ailani. "Your mother is a fighter, she'll make it," he tried to comfort her. The emergency doctor appeared in the corridor after endless minutes of waiting, his white coat stained with sweat, his face grave as he approached the small group. Ailani was still kneeling on the floor, hugging Skylar, her sobs echoing through the empty hospital corridor. Thomas immediately stood up from the plastic chair where he had been sitting, his tense posture revealing the anxiety he was trying to hide. The doctor looked at each of them before speaking, clearly searching for the right words to explain a complex situation. "Family of Mrs. Paisley?" he asked professionally. "Yes, that's us. How is she?" Thomas responded, taking responsibility. The doctor took a deep breath and began to explain, using simple but direct terms, that Paisley had a brain tumor in a very advanced stage. He described how the mass had grown considerably, pressing on vital areas of the brain, causing the fainting, seizures, loss of movement. Ailani raised her eyes, red from crying, trying to process every word, trying to understand how her mother had hidden something so serious for so long. The doctor continued, mentioning that according to hospital records, Paisley had been diagnosed days ago. "Her tumor is in terminal phase. She must have had symptoms for months," the doctor explained. "The progression is aggressive and she needs immediate surgery," he added gravely. Ailani frowned, a recent memory emerging through the fog of her despair. She clearly remembered when her mother had returned from the hospital days ago, pale and shaking, but insisting everything was fine. She especially remembered the moment when Paisley had handed her the envelope with all the saved money, saying it was for her future, for Vienna. Understanding began to slowly dawn in the girl's heart, like pieces of a terrible puzzle fitting together. "Doctor, My mother went to the hospital a few days ago. What happened there? Ailani asked with a trembling voice. Why did she come home if she was so sick? She questioned through tears. The doctor checked some papers on his clipboard, his eyes scanning the notes from the colleague who had previously treated Paisley. His expression became even grimmer when he found the information he was looking for. He looked at Ailani with a mixture of compassion and professional frustration, clearly uncomfortable with what he needed to reveal. The corridor seemed to have gone quieter. Even the distant sounds of the hospital seemed to have diminished. Your mother refused treatment. She signed the papers for discharge against medical advice, the doctor revealed. She said she didn't have resources for the surgery, he added regretfully. Ailani felt as if the floor had disappeared beneath her feet. Her hands began to shake violently as the complete truth of her mother's sacrifice was revealed. Paisley had the money, had exactly the amount needed for the surgery, but had chosen to give it to Ailani instead of saving her own life. The girl stood up staggering, Skylar still holding her arm for support. The tears now fell silently, each one carrying the weight of guilt and love mixed together. She had the money, she had it, Ailani cried in despair. She chose to die so I could go to Vienna, sobbed the girl. Thomas and Skylar exchanged shocked looks, both instantly understanding the magnitude of Paisley's sacrifice. A mother had literally chosen death to ensure her daughter's future. Thomas, who had built his fortune through calculated and cold decisions, felt something break inside him in the face of such a demonstration of pure and selfless love. Skylar hugged Ailani tighter, her own tears mixing with those of the younger girl. Your mother loves you more than life itself, whispered Skylar. She made the choice that every mother would make, she tried to comfort. Ailani suddenly broke free from Skylar's embrace and ran back to where she had left her backpack, fallen near the waiting chairs. She opened it with frantic hands, searching for something with growing desperation. Then her fingers found what she was looking for, the thick envelope still intact, with every note that Paisley had saved over 5 years of sacrifices. Ailani held it against her chest for a moment, feeling the weight not just of the paper, but of every extra hour her mother had worked, every meal she had skipped, every small pleasure she had denied herself. The money is still here, said Ailani, holding the envelope. We can use it to save her now, she exclaimed with renewed hope. The girl ran back to the doctor, pushing the envelope into his surprised hands. The words came out in a desperate torrent, explaining that this was the money for the surgery, that her mother had saved every penny, that they could operate now. Ailani fell to her knees in front of the doctor, her hands joined in supplication, begging them to save Paisley. The doctor took the envelope, clearly moved by the scene, but his expression remained concerned. Please, doctor, use this money, Ailani begged. Save my mother. I don't want Vienna, I want her, she cried in desperation. Thomas quickly approached, his commanding presence filling the space. He had made a decision in that moment, one of the most important of his life. He gently placed his hand on Ailani's shoulder, his voice laden with emotion and gratitude for the woman who had saved his family. Years of business success had made him a man of action, and he was ready to repay Paisley's sacrifice. Ailani, let me pay for your mother's surgery, Thomas offered sincerely. She saved my life and my daughter's. It's the least I can do, he insisted. Ailani slowly stood up and looked at Thomas with iron determination in her young eyes. She pressed the envelope against her chest and shook her head negatively, tears still streaming down her face. Her voice came out firm despite the crying, carrying a conviction that surprised everyone present. The girl had made her own decision, one that would honor her mother's sacrifice in the only way that mattered. No, Mr. Carter, I appreciate it very much, but I will pay, Ailani said firmly. My mother needs to know that no trip or exchange program has more value than she does in my life, she declared with absolute conviction. Thomas was momentarily speechless, deeply touched by the girl's maturity and love. Skylar held Ailani's hand in support, perfectly understanding the girl's need to make this gesture. The doctor looked between them, processing the emotional dynamics of the situation. Thomas then nodded respectfully, understanding that this was Ailani's gift to her mother, the definitive proof that her love was worth more than all the dreams in the world. I understand, Ailani. Then I promise something different, said Thomas emotionally. "When your mother recovers, I guarantee that you two will never want for anything again," he promised with a choked voice. The doctor nodded affirmatively and began giving quick orders to the nursing team that had appeared. The hospital machinery sprang into action. Forms were brought, surgical preparations initiated, specialists summoned. Ailani hugged the envelope one last time before finally handing it to the doctor, knowing she was making the right choice. Skylar hugged her tightly, and Thomas placed his protective hand on both girls' shoulders. "This woman raised an extraordinary daughter," Thomas told the doctor. "Do whatever is necessary to save her," he ordered with a choked voice. The following minutes were a whirlwind of activity. Nurses ran through the corridors. Equipment was transported, the surgical center was prepared. The doctor explained that the surgery would be extremely complex and long, possibly lasting many hours. The tumor was in a delicate location, and removing it would require absolute precision. Every minute counted now, as Paisley was in critical condition. Ailani insisted on seeing her mother before surgery, and after some hesitation, the doctor allowed it. "The surgery will last at least 20 hours, informed the doctor. "It will be one of the most complex we have ever performed," he admitted honestly. Ailani was taken to the preparation room where Paisley was being prepared for surgery. "Your mother was unconscious, connected to several machines, her face as pale as paper." Ailani held her inert hand, whispering promises and asking for forgiveness. She promised she would be strong, that she would achieve all her dreams, but that she needed her alive to witness it. Skylar and Thomas stood at the door, giving the girl a private moment with her mother. "Mom, you're going to live." "I know you will," whispered Ailani. "I need you. I can't do this alone," she pleaded, kissing Paisley's hand. The surgical team arrived, dressed in sterilized clothing, ready to begin. The chief neurosurgeon, a middle-aged man with steady hands and kind eyes, approached Ailani. He explained that they would do absolutely everything possible, that he had the best team in the hospital, that they wouldn't give up. Ailani had to be gently pulled away from Paisley as the stretcher was taken to the operating room. The girl stood in the hallway, watching the double doors close behind her mother. "We'll take good care of her," promised the surgeon. "Now you need to be strong and wait," he advised before disappearing. The hours that followed were the longest in Ailani's life. She, Skylar, and Thomas settled in the surgical center's waiting room, a sterile space with uncomfortable chairs and a television that nobody watched. Ailani couldn't stay still, walking back and forth, checking the clock every few minutes. Skylar tried to distract her with conversations, but nothing could divert the girl's mind from what was happening beyond those doors. "How long has it been?" Ailani constantly asked. "Just 2 hours, dear." "We have a long way to go," Skylar patiently responded. Thomas had briefly stepped out to make some calls, returning with news that Valerie had been formally charged and was being held without bail. He had also arranged for food and drinks to be brought, although nobody had much appetite. The man who had been a cold and distant businessman now showed a human side that Skylar had rarely seen. He told Ailani about how Paisley had been brave, how she had risked everything to save her family. "Your mother is extraordinary, Ailani," Thomas said with genuine admiration. "I treated her as just a maid, but she is a true angel," he admitted with regret. As the hours passed, other doctors occasionally appeared with brief updates. The surgery was progressing, but it was delicate. The tumor was larger than initially thought, but the team was confident. Each update was received with a mixture of relief and renewed anxiety. Ailani clung to every word, analyzing each facial expression of the doctors for signs of hope or concern. "The surgery is going as expected," a doctor informed. "We still have many hours ahead, but everything is under control," he reassured. During the long vigil, Skylar and Ailani grew closer. The older teenager shared stories about her own mother, who had died when she was young. She understood the pain and fear that Ailani was feeling. The two girls hugged several times, finding comfort in each other. Thomas watched them, his heart warming as he saw his daughter showing such compassion. "My mother was brave too," Skylar told Ailani. "She would have really liked your mother," she said affectionately. Night fell, and the hospital grew quieter. The waiting room was almost empty now, just the three of them keeping vigil. Ailani had finally succumbed to exhaustion, falling asleep with her head on Skylar's lap. Thomas covered both with his jacket, then sat in the chair across from them, his eyes fixed on the doors of the surgical center. He thought about all the years he had wasted chasing money and status, ignoring the truly valuable people around him. "I never paid attention to my employees. I ignored the bravest woman I've known," Thomas muttered to himself. "How was I so blind?" he questioned quietly. The first light of dawn began to filter through the hospital windows when a movement at the doors of the surgical center caught Thomas's attention. He gently woke Eilani and Skylar. The chief neurosurgeon appeared, clearly exhausted, his face showing the marks of 20 hours of intense concentration. Eilani jumped up, her eyes desperately searching the doctor's face for signs of good or bad news. "How is my mother?" Eilani asked before the doctor could even speak. "Did she survive? Please tell me she's okay," she pleaded. The doctor smiled, tired but genuinely, and Eilani felt her legs almost give way with relief. He explained that they had managed to remove the entire tumor, that the surgery had been a success from a technical standpoint. Paisley had survived the procedure, her vital signs were stable. However, he warned, she was in a deep coma. It was impossible to say when or if she would wake up. The brain needed time to recover from the trauma of surgery. "We managed to remove the tumor completely," the doctor announced. "But she is in a coma. Now it's up to her," he explained honestly. Eilani asked to see her mother immediately, and the doctor agreed to take them to the intensive care unit. Paisley was in a hospital bed, surrounded by machines monitoring every vital function. Tubes and wires connected her to various equipment. She looked small and fragile, but she was alive. Eilani approached carefully, taking her mother's hand with infinite delicacy. The hand was warm, which gave the girl hope. "Mom, I'm here," Eilani whispered. "The surgery worked." "You're going to be fine," she said with conviction. Skylar approached from the other side of the bed, taking Paisley's other hand. She also whispered words of encouragement, gratitude, and hope. Thomas stood at the foot of the bed, observing the woman who had saved his family at an almost fatal cost to herself. He made silent promises that when Paisley woke up, her life would be different. She would never have to sacrifice herself again, never be treated as invisible again. "Paisley, you need to wake up," Skylar said softly. "We're a family now, and families stay together," she promised. A nurse came in to check the equipment and informed them that Paisley would be kept in intensive care until she showed signs of improvement. Visitors would be allowed, but at restricted times. Eilani immediately declared that she wouldn't leave the hospital, that she would stay there until her mother woke up. Thomas didn't argue. Instead, he arranged for an extra bed to be placed in the room for Eilani. Skylar said she would stay too, not wanting to leave her new friend alone. "We'll take turns," Thomas planned. "Paisley won't be alone for even a minute," he assured. The days that followed established a routine. Eilani spent every possible moment by Paisley's bedside, talking to her, reading to her, playing the songs she practiced for Vienna on a small keyboard that Thomas had brought. Skylar helped, bringing food for Eilani, ensuring she rested, being the older sister Eilani never had. Thomas took care of everything, hospital bills, legal arrangements, ensuring Eilani had everything she needed. "You wanted my future, Mum," Eilani said, holding Paisley's hand. "But my future is with you. Vienna can wait," she declared firmly. 1 week passed, then 2. Paisley remained in a coma, but her vital signs remained stable. The doctors said it was a good sign that the brain was healing. Eilani never lost hope, never stopped talking to her mother. She told about her day, about visits from school friends, about how Thomas had arranged a private tutor so she wouldn't miss classes. Skylar was always around, supporting, comforting, being family. "Today the music teacher said I can audition whenever I want," Eilani told her. "But I'll only go when you can watch me," she promised her unconscious mother. Thomas had visibly changed during these weeks. The arrogant, distant man had been replaced by someone more humble and compassionate. He spent hours at the hospital, not just out of obligation, but out of genuine care. He had discovered through his own investigations how much Paisley had sacrificed over the years. Not just money, but opportunities, health, comfort, everything for Eilani. He marveled at such devotion. "When you wake up, you'll have any job you want," Thomas promised Paisley. "But more than that, you'll have a family, "You're our family now," he declared emotionally. Skylar had also grown through this experience. She had found in Eleni the sister she always wanted, and in Paisley, a maternal figure she deeply admired. She spent hours researching coma recovery, sensory stimulation, anything that might help Paisley wake up. She brought essential oils that Paisley liked, played her favorite songs, anything that might reach her wherever her mind was. "Paisley, you taught me what true courage is," Skylar said. "Now I need you to be brave once more and come back to us," she pleaded. 3 weeks had passed when it happened. Ailani was studying a song, one she had practiced 1,000 times for the Vienna audition. Skylar was reading aloud a book she had discovered Paisley liked. Thomas was sitting quietly in the corner, working on his laptop, but always attentive. It was Skylar who noticed first, a small movement in Paisley's fingers. "She moved!" Skylar shouted. "Her fingers moved!" exclaimed in ecstasy. Ailani dropped the music theory book and ran to the bed, taking her mother's face between her hands. Paisley's eyes were moving under her closed eyelids, as if she were trying to wake up from a very deep dream. Thomas called the doctors immediately, and soon the room was full of professionals checking signals, performing tests, murmuring among themselves. Then, miraculously, Paisley's eyes slowly opened. "Mom!" shouted Ailani in jubilation. "You're back!" "You came back to me," she cried with joy. Paisley blinked several times, trying to focus. Her mouth moved, but no sound came out initially. Ailani held her hand tightly, Skylar on the other side, Thomas at the foot of the bed, all waiting anxiously. Finally, with a hoarse and weak voice, Paisley managed to whisper a single word that filled the room with tears of joy. "Ailani," whispered Paisley. "My daughter," she managed to say with immense effort. The doctor explained that Paisley would have a long recovery ahead. She would need to relearn many things, undergo physical therapy, speech therapy, but the prognosis was good. The tumor had been completely removed, and there were no signs of significant permanent damage. With time and care, she could have a complete recovery. Ailani cried with joy, hugging her mother with infinite care. "We'll take care of her," Thomas told the doctor. "Whatever she needs, regardless of cost," he assured. Paisley looked around the room, seeing the 3 faces watching her with so much love and concern. She tried to speak again, wanting to thank them, wanting to explain, but Ailani gently placed a finger on her lips. No words were necessary at that moment. The love, gratitude, relief, everything was clear in everyone's eyes. "Rest now, Mom," Ailani said softly. "We have all the time in the world," she promised with a radiant smile. Skylar took Paisley's hand and squeezed it gently, tears of joy streaming down her young face. She had gained more than a friend or a savior. She had gained a second mother, someone who had shown what true love means. Thomas approached, his voice choked with emotion as he made his promises. "Paisley, you saved my family. Now it's our turn to take care of you," said Skylar. "We're family now, forever," declared Thomas with absolute conviction. 2 years had passed since that fateful night at the Carter mansion. Paisley walked through the corridors of Vienna's Musikverein, one of the most prestigious concert halls in the world, her confident steps echoing on the polished marble floor. She wore an elegant navy blue dress that Skylar had insisted on buying for her, and her hair was arranged in a sophisticated bun. The woman who once hid in the shadows as an invisible maid now walked with her head held high, radiating a dignity she had always possessed but could finally express freely. Beside her, Thomas Carter nervously adjusted his bow tie, clearly moved by the event they were about to witness. The last 2 years had completely transformed his life and perspective. Valerie had been sentenced to 15 years in prison for her multiple criminal charges, and the divorce had been finalized quickly. Thomas had recovered most of his money, and more importantly, had recovered his humanity. He looked at Paisley with genuine affection and respect, amazed at the strength of this woman who had overcome so much. "Are you nervous?" Thomas asked gently. "A little, but it's a good nervousness," replied Paisley with a radiant smile. Skylar, now 17, held Paisley's arm on the other side, practically vibrating with excitement. The teenager had flourished in the last 2 years, free from Valerie's toxic influence and surrounded by the love of her expanded new family. She and Ailani had become inseparable before the younger one's departure to Vienna, exchanging messages daily, sharing every detail of their lives. Skylar had even started learning German so she could visit Ailani and better understand her musical world. "I can't wait to see her play. The recordings she sends are amazing," said Skylar enthusiastically. "She said it's even better, Liv," she added proudly. Paisley paused for a moment in the ornate lobby, observing the golden paintings on the ceiling, the crystal chandeliers that sparkled like diamonds, the elegantly dressed people conversing in multiple languages. 2 years ago, she was dying in a hospital, having sacrificed everything for Ailani's future. Now, thanks to Thomas's generosity and the love of her expanded new family, she was in Vienna to watch her daughter realize the dream they had both nurtured for so long. Paisley's eyes filled with tears of gratitude. "It still feels like a dream to be here," confessed Paisley emotionally. "It's real and you deserve every moment of it," assured Skylar, squeezing her arm. Paisley's recovery had been long and challenging, but she had faced each obstacle with the same determination she had shown when saving the Carter family. Months of physical therapy, speech therapy, cognitive exercises. She had attacked everything with renewed vigor, motivated by the desire to be completely present in Ailani's life. Thomas had kept his promise, ensuring that Paisley had the best medical care, and more importantly, that she never had to worry about money again. He had created a special position for her in his company, international relations consultant, leveraging her impressive knowledge of languages. Ailani had left for Vienna 1 year after Paisley's recovery, when doctors declared that her mother was completely healed and strong enough to handle the separation. The goodbye at the airport had been bittersweet. Tears mixed with smiles, promises of daily calls, hugs that seemed endless. But Paisley had insisted that Ailani go, that she pursue her dream with all her heart. And Ailani had flourished in Vienna, her teachers constantly praising her exceptional talent and dedication. "Your daughter is one of the most promising students we've ever had," the conservatory director had said. "She has a bright future ahead," he had assured. They found their seats in the theater, privileged seats in the third row, courtesy of Thomas's connections. Paisley held the concert program with trembling hands, seeing Ailani's name printed among the selected soloists from the conservatory. Ailani Mendez, piano, Beethoven's Sonata No. 14. It was the same piece she had played on that small keyboard in the hospital while Paisley was in a coma. The music that had somehow reached her mother in the depths of unconsciousness and brought her back. "She chose this piece for you," revealed Skylar. "Said it was the music that connected you two," she explained tenderly. The theater lights dimmed and the audience fell into respectful silence. Paisley felt her heart race when the first performer entered the stage. It wasn't Ailani yet, but each performance brought her closer to the moment. Thomas discreetly took Paisley's hand, offering silent support. In the past 2 years, they had developed a deep friendship based on mutual respect and shared experiences. He had become the father Ailani never had, and Paisley had become a stable maternal presence for Skylar. It wasn't a romance, but something perhaps more precious, a chosen family united not by blood but by love and loyalty. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, the presenter announced Ailani. Paisley held her breath as her daughter walked onto the stage, dressed in an elegant black dress, her hair styled in the same way that Paisley used to do for her. Ailani had grown in the past 2 years, not just physically but in confidence and presence. She walked to the piano with professional grace, bowed to the audience, her eyes searching for and finding Paisley in the crowd. A small smile passed over her lips before sitting at the piano. The first notes of the Moonlight Sonata filled the theater, and Paisley felt tears flowing freely down her face. The music was more than sound. It was their story, each note carrying memories of sacrifice, love, loss, and rebirth. Ailani played with an emotional maturity, far beyond her 14 years, her hands dancing over the keys with technical precision and emotional depth. The audience was completely captivated, but for Paisley, it was as if she and Ailani were the only people in the theater. "She is extraordinary," whispered Thomas in awe. "It's the most beautiful music I've ever heard," agreed Skylar emotionally. When the last note resonated through the theater, there was a moment of complete silence before the audience erupted in thunderous applause. People stood up, a spontaneous standing ovation for the young pianist. Ailani rose and made several bows, her cheeks flushed with emotion and pride. Her eyes met Paisley's again, and mother and daughter shared a moment of perfect understanding. Every sacrifice had been worth it to reach this moment. After the concert, they waited backstage. Ailani ran into Paisley's arms as soon as she saw her, the two embracing as if they hadn't seen each other for years instead of just a few months. Skylar joined the hug, the three forming a circle of love and joy. Thomas stood a bit apart, respecting the moment, but Ailani pulled him into the group, insisting that he was family too. "You were perfect, my daughter," said Paisley through tears of joy. "All this is thanks to you, mother. Your love brought me here," Ailani responded emotionally. They dined at a small Austrian restaurant that Ailani had discovered and loved, a cozy place away from the formality of the concert world. Ailani told stories about her life in Vienna, her international friends, her demanding but kind teachers, the wonders she had discovered in the city. Paisley listened to every word with fascination, amazed at her daughter's confidence and joy. Skylar asked endless questions, wanting to know every detail. Thomas observed everything with a paternal smile, occasionally contributing an observation or joke. "I'm thinking of specializing in Baroque music," Ailani announced. "But I also want to explore modern compositions," she added enthusiastically. Later, walking through the illuminated streets of Vienna, Paisley reflected on the journey that had brought them there. From a dying maid who had sacrificed everything, to a woman surrounded by love and family, witnessing her daughter live her dreams. Life had taken unimaginable turns, transforming tragedy into triumph, sacrifice into salvation. Thomas had mentioned during dinner that he was considering opening a foundation in Paisley's name to help working families educate their talented children. Paisley had been speechless at the proposal. "I want other children to have the chances that Ailani had," Thomas had said. "And I want you to lead this, Paisley," he had proposed. When the time came to say goodbye to Ailani again, Paisley didn't feel the same anguish as the first time. She now knew that the bonds between them were unbreakable, strengthened by the fire of the trials they had faced. Ailani would return home for holidays, and Paisley, Thomas and Skylar would visit her regularly. The family they had built knew no geographical boundaries. "Go and conquer the world, my daughter," said Paisley, hugging Ailani. "You already conquered it, Mum. You taught me how," Ailani replied with infinite love. On the flight back home, Paisley looked out the airplane window, observing the clouds illuminated by the sun. Skylar had fallen asleep with her head on her shoulder. Thomas was reading a book beside her. In 2 years, she had died and been reborn, had lost everything and gained even more. Love, Paisley discovered, was the only currency that truly mattered, and she was now the richest woman in the world. Now tell me in the comments where you're from and tell me, did you like this story? Then subscribe to the channel, leave your like and check out the next one that's waiting for you here on the screen. I'll wait for you there.